Upon suffering beyond suffering, the red nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world, a world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations, a world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. Crazy Horse. Welcome to the Lost Traveler podcast. I'm your host, Henry Cameron Allen. I'm very, very privileged to have two very special guests today, and this episode will launch a month-long celebration and information about our Indigenous brothers and sisters. This is Indigenous Peoples Month, and I thought it would be a good time to highlight some history and how that history has affected us and continues to affect us, not only as North Americans, but around the world. I'm especially delighted and tickled because my two guests today, it turns out, are blood relations. We are cousins through our European ancestry. So that's very exciting. We have Sherry Rose Cardinal, who is a professional clinical social worker and psychotherapist. Welcome, Sherry.
Well, thank you.
So happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
And our other guest and my co-host for the series is Chief Midegah of the Red Bear Band of the Pembina Chippewa Nation, the great Chippewa Nation of the Council of the Three Fires, which was first recorded in full effect in 796 in the Common Era. Is that
Absolutely.
right? That's
Absolutely.
amazing.
It is crazy. You know, people don't talk a lot about the paper that it involved, but we have scrolls from 796 AD. Potawatomi Elder Shup Shawana, he talked all about it, but Ginina Nana Bojo, or greetings and thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. And it's been kind of a whirlwind meeting of my cousins, and very eye-opening for me to know that I have Indigenous relatives in my family, and a great honor as well, because I've always felt somehow connected, but not quite sure through my DNA. It doesn't appear anywhere that I have Indigenous blood, but we're all connected. All of us are related around the world. And what this has really allowed me to reflect on is that every human being on the planet is Indigenous in their heritage, and going back to the first people. And that makes me feel very connected to everyone, but especially knowing my cousins is a real state of grace for me.
You know, we have a saying, and that's we call ourselves the Anishinaabe, or the Anishinaabe, and those who are the spontaneous people, or those that the Creator put on the earth. And we're probably one of the only people in the world that we don't define who we are by a boundary, you know, a river, a mountain, a stream, you know, a prairie or a forest. That every living person on the world, whether they're in Asia or Africa or Europe or Australia or across the Pacific Islands or North and South America, you know, we consider them also Anishinaabe. We're all the same people. We all have the same Creator. We all live on the same earth. And so, you know, it's remarkable to me to find my relations, and which you two both are.
That's right. And I didn't know, Sherry, that you and I were connected until I went on however you pronounce it, geni.com. And I found you and found that we are also cousins. And and this is after we met. I was just curious to find out. So let's start with you, Sherry, and your story, and a little bit of your genealogical history as well, because you have, was it half and half? European and North American?
Yes. Well, probably more like, I don't know, 2/3 European, because my Indigenous side involves the French Canadians and the Metis. But the last 2 years, I am, like you say, a clinical social worker. a psychotherapist. But fortunately for my clients, I have forgotten what I learned in school. And I teach from what I've learned through life and through my ancestors, even though I didn't always know who they were. But somehow, I call it the knowing. They were still very present in my life and leading me blindly. I didn't know where I was going. It was a quest I started when I was an early teenager, 13, 14, and met up with Chief Elton Green at the Tuscaroras. And he taught me some things and took me to my first powwow, not physically, but the Tuscarora put on the powwow, and I immediately felt the connection. And I couldn't explain it. I asked my adoptive parents where that came from. They didn't know. They said, "Oh, you got some French in you, apparently." So that started me on a quest that now has lasted. I'm 71, so you do the math. at least 55 or 60 years. And the magic of it is that it's only been in the last 2 years where I actually found my roots. And I did find my birth mother, and that was a start. We became very close. She didn't live very long, but she gave me some information which gave me a trail to follow, which I never had before. And that came through DNA. Finding her, that's a long story, but in researching her family through my mitochondrial DNA, mitochondrial, I forget the word, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's good, that's right.
That our beginnings in the Americas started with the Mayflower. I am actually, through my mother's lines, related to passengers on the Mayflower 3 times that I know about already, starting with Stephen Hopkins, and he is my 11th great-grandfather. His daughter, Constance Hopkins, is he's my 12th great-grandfather. I get it all confused. Numbers. And then the Warrens and the Moores, and they were all Mayflower passengers. And actually, that's where you and I connect up, through my great-great-grandmother, who was descendant from the Mayflower passengers. And so I was working with that this past year, trying to figure it all out. And I was very grateful. At least I had some roots, but that didn't answer the question of who my father was. Again, I was adopted at birth with no information. And I think that is some of the trauma that we do to people, is not give them information about who they are. Because it's always been a quest of mine. It's been deep since I was a little girl, that things were different about me. And I think that's the violence that we do. Fortunately, records are being opened now, and that's what allowed me to find my mother through DNA. But the name she gave me for my father turned out not to be correct. So I was on this rabbit trail for quite a while. And I don't know what that untruth is about. I don't judge her. I don't know if she didn't know for sure. I don't know if it was a violent act, because he was quite a bit older than her. I don't know how that came about. But I did find my birth father through a DNA match to 3 half-brothers. And it was the Bouvier lineage. And I thought, well, okay, I'll search this. So for the past year, I've been searching Bouvier and coming up with hundreds of DNA matches. They were prolific.
Wow.
So, and through that is how Midegah found me, I guess, on Genie. And I was searching through my Bouvier lineage, and there's all kinds of offshoots. And these offshoots started coming up with Chippewa, Anishinaabe people. And I went, what? And then I realized that the Bouviers moved west from New France, Montreal area, Canada, and married Indigenous people. They were buffalo hunters. They were fur trappers. They worked for Hudson's Bay Company, and their names are on their rolls. And so I started researching this history and the names that kept coming up. And one day, and I'm not sure, I don't quite remember how, because it's all kind of a blur, Midegah showed up on my timeline on Genie somehow. I guess through me rifling through all this Indigenous lineage I was finding. And we started to communicate very slowly at first, and realized that we were cousins. And I'm still in disbelief, because now finally at 71 years old, I know who I am. Both my Indigenous side, my French Canadian lines, my European Mayflower lines, they've all come together. And now I feel like a whole person. And it's been some of the trauma of my life not knowing that.
Has it changed your work and your approach to your work?
It has. I've always considered myself to be a bit of a storyteller.
We must be related.
No kidding. I do psychotherapy through storytelling lots of times, because people can't connect through clinical words and phrases, and it's a whole nother language, and it really doesn't serve any good purpose. So I developed a whole different clinical language. Like, for example, I specialize in treating trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. That name kind of rankles me. Why is it a disorder? Why are we putting people in a negative box, making them think that there's something wrong with them, when post-traumatic stress injury is more the truth that something happened to them. It's an injury that happened to them that affected them psychologically, spiritually, physically, mentally. And that impact colors their whole lives. And I speak from experience, because I wrestle with post-traumatic stress injury from my own history, including a carjacking, where I was kidnapped and left for dead in the middle of a street. But that was like icing on the cake, because it taught me how to look at mental health differently. I had to go through that to understand mental health, that something wrong has happened to you that has affected your person, that has affected your ability to function in this world. Not that that's such a great thing sometimes. But that helped me to understand that there was more to the story. There was more to the story. And so at the time, I was still exploring my Indigenous lines, and I have been all my life. I have been connected to things and groups of people and my heritage from that sense of knowing. And then helping them, including people that had been through survived boarding school, residential school, depending on which country you're talking from, and understanding the lateral violence that happens in Indigenous cultures. That is a misplaced trauma from the main culture onto the subcultures that they force upon each other. It's both lateral and vertical. Starts vertical, ends up lateral. And this is prevalent in Indigenous cultures. I would venture to guess from around the world, because I also have friends in Australia and they have the same thing there with their Indigenous.
Yeah.
And very good friends. And we all specialize in the critical incident stress management or trauma of lives and people. And I always look for trauma, because trauma is what contributes to people behaving badly. It's always a contributor. I've never failed to find it. And I work with first responders and police in my community as well. They see trauma every day and they have no way to deal with it. And so the last 12 years, I've had a program to help police and for other first responders to deal with the trauma of their profession, which is very often on top of the trauma of their personal lives. And it gets very complicated, complex trauma, we call it. And it affects many groups of people.
Yeah. And
Indigenous people is one of the things that comes from my heart, that it's time we address that. That we address the trauma.
And now we'll take a brief pause for a word from our sponsor. Stories are at the very heart of what makes us human. We each have one, and we can learn and grow from listening to each other. The Listen podcast is an exploration of the stories of Americans abroad and how they got there. If you're curious about the world and hungry for community, check out their website at www.thelistenpodcast.com or their Facebook group at the Listen Podcast Community.
And we're seeing these common threads around the globe. We're seeing it from enslaved peoples from around the world. Mm-hmm. We see it from immigrants who know nothing of the families that were left behind when their families came to North America 100 years ago or more. We're seeing these common threads emerge right now in a way that I think is unprecedented. And that's really one of the reasons that I started this podcast, to find experts in universal life skills that we can all recognize, not only in other cultures, but also in ourselves. We now have listeners in 30 countries around the world. And I know that this is going to be resonant, this conversation and what you're talking about in terms of post-traumatic injury, complex post-traumatic injury, which I've been diagnosed with as well. So I can totally relate on that level. Yeah, I mean, let's dive in deep. Midegah, talk a little bit about your own biography and how you have sort of emerged as quite a powerful voice in the Indigenous community, especially for the Chippewa.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that that Cousin Sherry talked a little bit about lateral violence.
Yes.
I come from a mostly European mother who happens to be a direct lineal descendant to a lady named Matoaka or Pocahontas. Now, that doesn't make me special. There's about 100,000 people that are also, directly related. But it is interesting historically, and to consider, even my cousin Sherry's direct relations on the Mayflower and how they must have all interacted in that first few decades that they came to the Americas. And so my father is a Pembina Chippewa, which is a subdivision of the Great Chippewa Nation, which is one of the 3 council fire keepers of the Anishinaabe people, who are first recorded in 796 AD, recorded on paper. It's real paper. And believe it or not, paper existed in what you call North America as far back as then, and maybe further back than that. And a Potawatomi elder named Shup Shawana had recorded this fully functioning government. And so that's my father. Most recently, I guess within the last 5 generations, I come from a lot of really interesting characters that are also a part of, such as Cousin Sherry talked about, the Hudson Bay Company or the Northwest Trading Company. These were these fur trading companies that the French had brought in and spread, and the British had spread through what is mostly known today as Canada and the Midwest. And what they would do is they would marry into the principal families, the principal chieftain families, and try to create an alliance. And there's their own trauma when you do that, because then all of a sudden, you're creating a mixed people that we call Métis or Michif, but the Anishinaabe, the original people of I guess this area, they didn't see it that way. They saw it that we were all put here, red, yellow, black, and white. We call it a medicine wheel, a circle of love, and that regardless of your skin color, you're one family. And that when that family comes back together, such as happening right now, right. I'm speaking with my cousin Henry and my cousin Sherry. It's the most interesting thing ever, and I can say that that my life has also been carried a generational trauma of what occurred to my 3rd and 4th great grandparents, as well as a direct immediate trauma of what occurred to my father or my mother or my grandparents. I'm not the person to shy away from my history. I was born to a teenage drug addict mother, struggling to find her way, and an Indigenous father who was never accepted. He was born into the U.S. boarding school system. Now in Canada they call it residential schools, but most Americans, I will tell you, 99.97% have no idea this even existed from 1900 to 1978. Where over almost 100% of all Indigenous children, when they reach the age of 6 or 7, were immediately under federal law forced to go to a boarding school, which was called an assimilation school,
right?
And thereby removed their cultural and familial identity. Now, at the same time they did, and this is from 1900 to 1978, it wasn't ended until 4 months after my birth. And so this is something that my father had to experience. Indigenous persons of North America, we call it Turtle Island, Niskanak Minisk, Turtle Island, but European descendants call it North America. And that's a whole nother conversation. But, I think that they forget that there was quite a struggle to retain your identity. And so in 1968 in the United States, they passed the Indian Civil Rights Act. That was after the Civil Rights Act that it protected the African Americans. And that's when we truly became equal participants in the American society. And so, my father bridges that gap. My grandmother bridges that gap. My great grandparents bridged that gap. But I'm the first generation, and many, many more that are in my generation, born in the 70s and 80s. The first generation who are actually able to live equally in this society. And so we carry a strong burden. It's a burden of responsibility to speak the truth about what occurred to our parents, our grandparents, and to not let that go away. I recently read today about President Joe Biden saying that those from families that were separated deserve some sort of restitution down at the Mexican-American border. And I consider, well, what about us?
Right.
What about us that were separated? It took my great-grandmother 10 years to find my grandma. 10 years to find her. It took my grandmother many, many years of being away from my father just so that she wouldn't cause undue harm on him by those government agents that were managing him. And so, it's a very interesting story. So I have a really interesting lineage. It's very bizarre. I'm very proud of it. It's kept me straight through my life, but I'm no different than anybody else. But I just happen to be selected as the Pembina Nation, the Pembina Chippewa Nation, a subdivision of the Great Chippewa Nation, which was the last group in North America, the last Indigenous group to stand autonomous, which didn't end until 1904, the very last ones that I represent them. And we're still dealing with the United States in a 117-year unresolved court case. So I hope that answers a little bit, Henry.
Well, it opens up to so many more questions, which is what this is for. What part of North America are we talking about in terms of the Chippewa territory, the Great Chippewa Nation?
Yeah, so the Anishinaabe actually are from what would be called Quebec through Ontario, all the way through what's called Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and then also south of that through northern Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, northern Illinois, Indiana, northern Ohio, and Michigan. Now, many, many people do not know that the Dominion of Canada was not created until 1867. It was a British colony. And that international border that split the Anishinaabe people did not occur until 1872.
And this is way after the Civil War, the American Civil War.
Way after.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. And so that split a people. Now, the Great Chippewa Nation was one of they call it the three council fires. Okay. Now, the Anishinaabe were a grouping of many people over a vast area. But the most populous, they aggregated around these three lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and Lake Huron. And they considered themselves the younger brother, the middle brother, and the older brother. The Great Chippewa Nation was the senior leadership of the Anishinaabe. And they were actually the final ones to kind of collapse amidst the reservation campaign that was initiated by a guy named Andrew Indian Killer Jackson. And that's a nickname that he picked and he loved. But that's the history of the United States that's not heard. Now, I say this very, very cautiously, because the people that exist today, the generations today, are the children and grandchildren of those who made it right. But we must be honest. The kindness, I always say that kindness is the power in peace, and the kindest thing you can ever do is speak truth to somebody. And so we must be honest when we look at that dollar bill, that even George Washington, the father of this nation, that is a known slave owner, was also a very troubled man in relation to the Indigenous. He had a nickname as well that he wanted to actually put on his gravestone. They didn't do it, but it was called Town Destroyer. And that's because after the British, who wanted to call themselves Americans, after this explorer named Americus Vespucci from Italy, that they took retaliation against a nation called the Haudenosaunee. Now, we know it today as the Iroquois. And George Washington marched on 28 of 30 Seneca villages. This is an indigenous nation, no different than France or Germany or Russia or China. In 28 of 30 cities, he killed every man, woman, child, and animal. And that's why he was called a town destroyer. And so this is a heritage that we've heard this history, this just generational trauma. And then we connect that to our own trauma with our own parents who don't know how to be parents because of boarding schools.
Mhm.
And we say, not a lot has changed.
Your generous sponsorship and individual support of the Lost Traveler podcast benefits the Lost Travelers Club, a charitable project under the fiscal sponsorship of United Charitable, a nonprofit 501c3 organization. The Lost Travelers Club focuses primarily on the needs of parents who have outlived their beloved children. We recently launched our new Brain Candy Project wing, providing art supplies to children still struggling with critical or terminal health-related conditions. We hope to raise enough funds to launch Brain Candy, an arts and literature magazine created by and for these young people. Find out more at www.braincandy.online. Thank you.
That's coming back to essential life skills. This is one of the things that I talk about as a life skills mentor and educator and ambassador globally, is that the people that are charged with teaching essential life skills to children are parents. And most parents are deficient in those very skills that they are charged, because they're not teaching them unless there is an established curriculum, and very few schools have them today. Hopefully that'll change, but we have to start this conversation somewhere about life skills and how we pass things on to children in this time where it's not clear what the truth is. And so kindness, I think, gets obscured a little bit. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. I mean, I see it everywhere because of what I do, is that nobody really knows how to parent. And when parents do stand up, you have this chaos that we've had, like in Virginia, that becomes political, to stand up and say what you want to teach your children or not teach your children. But parenting skills aren't taught anywhere. It's like all of a sudden you have this living thing and you take your best shot, forgetting that what we imprint on them, it becomes a life journey for them. And we don't really address that. Especially in Western culture, of which I'm most familiar, it's happenstance. It's happenstance. And if you have a good role model, consider yourself very fortunate. And if you don't, welcome to the majority. And it's a sad state of affairs, because, and people don't know their history. We don't delve into people's history like we should. I mean, mine was kept from me. I had to search for it for 60 some years. But we don't teach people their history, and people without a history, without roots, are subject to any wind that blows. And I think that's where we have a lot of the social dysfunction and there's that clinical word, social chaos that we have today, where there's so much lateral violence, group against group, and we don't speak in love. Everything is out of fear, and that's what I see in my clients too. That people that don't understand their roots, that don't understand that we're all one, that we're all made of atoms. Atoms is energy. Atoms are there and they don't die. They're not destroyed. They just reform. And who knows? Like us, we're finding out that we're actually blood kin and had no idea how those atoms traveled around the world. But if you don't know your roots, and I encourage all my clients to dig into their ancestry, to find out a little bit about who they are, because what brings them to me is they don't know who they are. And the winds of the people and culture around them make them sick. And we label them as mentally ill. And the way out of that is to understand who you are. And it's a life journey. doesn't happen in a therapist office. I'm just the guide.
Well, and there are tools. There are tools in every culture.
Yes.
In fact, Midegah, I would love for you to talk a little bit about the 7 grandfather teachings, because I think as a tool for, it reminds me of the Pirkei Avot, which are the Jewish ethics of our forefathers, which I taught in the temple in Gloucester, Massachusetts for a while. And it was so resonant with me when we're talking about the subject of life skills and where we are looking for truth and universal truths as well, because these Indigenous teachings are not only going to be understood by Indigenous people or children. This is universal wisdom,
Yes.
isn't it? Talk a little bit about that, Midegah, please.
Well, absolutely. And Cousin Sherry, I really appreciate you talking about that lateral violence. And these things are something that, even I personally experience. I come from a dudem. We call this a clan or a band. These are synonymous words. And I come from the Adik Sangha, which means standing firm reindeer or caribou. And there are those that attack anything that makes them feel afraid, right?
Yes.
And what is that? That they become accustomed to how things are, and why are things how they are? Because of something that's been pushed upon their grandparents, such as the Indian Reorganization Act of 1834. And so they think how it is how it is, and they don't ever stop and consider. And before I get into the grandfather teachings, this is a dilemma in the modern Indigenous person who's trying to escape the generational trauma and suffering of their parents and their ancestors back 4 and 5 generations. And that's accepting what is real and what is taught. Right. What existed before and what exists now, and does it have to be this way? And it doesn't. The poorest communities in the world outside of Africa are Indigenous reservations in the United States, the very country that took these resources and became the most powerful entity in the world. And yet those who had these things before are impoverished, and they almost accept it and almost fight for that, to keep that. And so what we try to remind them is that there were teachings given to all people around the world.
The biggest breakthrough in wellness in the past 50 years, Vox Life's wearable technology has no batteries, no wires, and no metals. When neuroreceptors on your feet or arms come into contact with the Vox HPT pattern, a neuroresponse is triggered, sending information to your central nervous system, helping regulate pain, maintain motor control, and balance. The effect is immediate, so you focus less on weathering through physical pain and discomfort and more on living a happier, healthier life. As a special promotion, our sponsor is donating 25% of your purchases through the following link to benefit the Lost Travelers Club and our new Brain Candy Project wing. Simply visit https://losttravellersclub-braincandyproject.voxlife.com. That's VOXXlife.com. It's a win-win.
Now, we say that this age, the world we live in, and when I say we, the midday we win. This is called the way of the heart. And we believe that there was a flood. And every Anishinaabe that you talk to, elder, back 200 years would have said the same. We had a flood. And after the flood, the Creator gave us 7 teachings on how to live in this world in harmony, in peace. And those are the real source of real power. Strength is fleeting. Strength, control, I'm the strongest person, that disappears in a short period of time. We've seen that through world history. There is no more Roman Empire.
Right.
Okay. There's no more Ottoman Empire. There's no more USSR. These things disappear. And if we're not careful, this can also hit home as well with that flag that we see, red, white, and blue. Nothing says it has to be forever.
Right.
But we certainly hope that if we follow core principles, perhaps it could. And so we say to have true power is to have true kindness. And that's to use wisdom, use love, use respect, use courage, use honesty, use humility, use truth in all things, in every step, in every word. And these 7 grandfather teachings of our grandfathers, will bring to fruition true power in your life, in others' lives, and in the world. And that means you have to speak for the tree, and you have to speak for the water, and you have to speak for the earth, and you have to speak for the people, because this really is the most precious place in the universe. And so we need to be teachers of kindness with our children, with our immediate family, and with our communities.
How do you teach your boys, your beautiful boys, about truth and what that means in the time that they are growing up? They're quite young still, but I'm sure they're starting to get a sense of the world around them. And how does Midegah teach
my boys?
his boys?
So I've been blessed with 2 little mini me's.
Yes,
one of them is Henry. Henry, he's
That's
4
for
years
sure.
old.
Good name.
His Chippewa name is Anamiki, Thunderer, and he is that. And my oldest son, David Sr., is that means Dagabuju, or the great gift, the great present. And what I do when I'm with them is I try to give them time, and I try to encourage creativity, and then also connectivity with their environment around them. There's an amazing thing that happens every day, Cousin Henry. Amazing. Every single day in the evening, the sun sets. Every day. And so when I'm with my boys, one of the things we do is we take what I call a walkabout. We go on a walk into the woods, and we go find a place to sit. And along that way, we see other people who are on journey, other things on journeys, insects, animals, creatures. And what they're trying to do is get back where they started their day, because it's about to be night. And so that's how we capture snakes and frogs and grasshoppers. And what we always do is we have a conversation about what do they share that you share? Do they have eyes? Do they have hearts? Do they perhaps have families? Are they living here as well? And if you woke up tomorrow with your consciousness, but you were in a body of an ant, how could you tell me that you're Henry and you were a human? I would think you're just a crazy ant, right? So have a little bit more respect and restraint. And so that's something that I try to instill in them. And then we sit, and there's a few things that originate from way back in the very beginning. You know, I guess we could all say we all come from, we're all related. All 3 of us are related. But I guess we could say everybody in the world's related. We all come from an original ancestor.
Right.
An original father and an original mother. And I guess there was a point in time, if we were to be honest, that they were sitting in that first day and they saw the sunset. And when they did, as I do with my boys, you feel everything calm down as that sun goes down. And you immediately realize your entire structure that you've created around you in society today is a manufactured reality, but this is real. This is real. And in this place, you're not separate from everything else that's there. So that's when those 7 teachings come in.
And so practical, easy to understand at any age. And I meditated on them quite a bit. And I'm going to put, by the way, listeners, I'm going to be putting in the description a link to the Little Shell Pembina Nation website. These teachings are there as well as a lot of other information that I think you'll find very interesting and inspiring.
Shadow and Light LLC was established by Dave Roberts and Reverend Patty Farino, co-authors of When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. Their mission is to empower individuals to transcend life challenges by integrating spiritual practices with psychology to achieve peace. They are available for individualized spiritual counseling, virtual or in-person presentations and workshops to universities, organizations, and other interested groups, virtual or in-person book club meetings. For further information, go to psychologyprofessorandminister.com.
Sherry, what about you? And you sent a picture to me of your beautiful grandsons. Do you talk to them about truth? Because they're a bit older now. And, what I know is true in my mentoring is that a large percentage of young people today are looking for those essential truths and life skills online. They're finding them in YouTube videos, and they're finding them in, places that we can only imagine. How do you guide them?
Well, boy, that hits home. That's a very deep, sad place for me. My grandsons live in Canada. I'm here in Texas. We really haven't been able to see each other for over 5 years now.
Oh, wow.
And so we Zoom it. In fact, my youngest grandson just turned 11 on Thursday. And so I Zoom in and we talk but my daughter-in-law is Cree, and her family is Cree. And up till now, they really haven't accepted me as being Indigenous because I couldn't give them names and numbers and things. That's changing. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a part of my personal healing and theirs as well, so that the word for grandmother in Cree is cookum. And they have a cookum up in Edmonton, Alberta, who has spends a lot of time with them. But I am hoping that this cookum for them will also have the opportunity to teach them some of these things, which has so far been denied to me for various reasons. And I don't place blame on anybody. It's just time now. Timing is everything. It's just time now for everybody to come together in unity and realize that we are all one. And that includes my son and his family.
Yeah. Thank you for going there with me.
Is it okay if I interject for a moment here?
Yeah.
Sherry, you are my cousin. You're my DNA is inside you and yours is inside me. And there's a guy that most Cree know. His name is Cuthbert James Grant. He was a member of the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Trading Company. And his wife was Margaret Grant. Her name was Utina Wasis. And that means sky child in Cree. And she's very well known in their history. And so I would highly encourage your children to know their own history, because when they do, they'll find these names and then they'll say, wait a minute, my grandmother is a cousin of these people, because you are. That's the sister of Miskilmakwa, Chief Red Bear the First, one of the principal chiefs of all Anishinaabe. And he roamed where he wanted. He was like the elk. He went where he wanted. But that's your family, and that's their family as well. Yes. And I think it's just reminding them that we have far more in common than we might assume at first glance.
Yeah. I thank you for that. I will talk with you later. I couldn't write all that down fast enough.
You can go listen to the podcast later. It's here forever.
I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
But that's something I think the three of us too can relate to. I sadly lost my son to brain cancer when he was 13 years ago, a lifetime. And to have distance between yourself and your children is painful. And I know that for my parents as well, I didn't live when Cameron was alive. We didn't live close to them. My father and stepmother were in Brazil. And years went by without their being able to spend time with him. My mother was in Colorado. I was in Minnesota. And so it was, I can feel the distance and I can feel the hurt. And one thing that I do know is true is that they know somewhere in them the connection between you. Time and space don't matter, really. It's not linear.
Now I got a message for you, Henry.
Yeah.
And it's something about, someone was talking earlier about atoms. Atoms are these little charged particles that I think everybody in the world today would accept exist. Okay. And there's a vast distance of empty space between these things at such a small level. It almost seems impossible to comprehend. It can be seen. And yet it can. But the remarkableness of it is that in the average human body, if all of that space were removed and those charged little spaces could touch each other, that all the atoms in your body comprise nothing but the size of a grain of sand, less than a grain of sand. And yet that small, insignificant grouping of these atoms, these visible things, comprises who you are. So what are you? And it's painted over something vast and that can't be seen, that the little thing we call a photon or a ray of light from the sun can't reflect off of because it's so fine, it's so pure. And so just because we shed a little grain of sand when we pass from this place to the next doesn't mean we cease being who we are.
That's right.
And the people that we've lost, whether those are our children or our parents or our grandparents or even our ancestors 7 generations back, they walk through a door and they're still themselves.
That's right.
And they're counting on us to finish the task of reuniting that one family that we all are a part of.
And that's what we're doing. And that's reflected in the stars. We look up at the night sky and we see all the stars strewn about like they're this close together, but there are light years between each one of them that we can't even comprehend, right? So it's all illusion. It's all illusion, right? Yeah. Space, time, all of that energy, like you said, Sherry, we are all energy, everything in this universe. And energy cannot be created and it can't be destroyed. It just changes form, right? And so death is an illusion. Distance is an illusion. This is why if I ever write a memoir, it's going to be called I Am Not a Morning Person, M-O-U-R-N, because it's really transformed my journey, my path to have that revelation. And I'm grateful if there's a gift in the loss, if there's a gift in the distance between us, it is that for me.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Johansson, and this is My Little House.
My Little House is an interactive, multi-sensory educational felt toy that I invented to help develop children's language skills.
I love My Little House.
I've been working as a speech therapist for over 20 years. So then I just thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just take this one-dimensional board and make it into an actual 3-dimensional toy? How cool would that be?
That's the idea behind My Little House. You can spread it out flat like a 4-panel felt board, or here's the cool part. In the blink of an eye, My Little House easily converts into a 3-dimensional reversible house. My Little House comes with 36 felt cutout pieces that match outlines in 8 colorful rooms. And they're felt, so they stick. Each piece inside My Little House has been placed with purpose.
But My Little House isn't just for kids on the spectrum or with significant disorders. It's also for typically developing 2 to 5-year-olds. It's a fun toy. I always say to my kids, when you get stuck, you have to ask for help. Can you tell me what you see on top of the refrigerator?
Apple.
I know that My Little House is going to make a difference in thousands of children's lives. I just need your help in getting it out there. Thank you so much for listening.
For more information about My Little House, My Little Farm, My Little Zoo, and other smart felt toys, visit www.smartfelttoys.com.
Brilliant.
So many great practical things. I could go on and on and on and on with you both, and I hope we will keep going on. And there have been so many wonderful practical tools here in this episode that we don't need to reflect on that as we wrap up. It's coming to the end, but I would love to invite Midegah to offer something very special to us, to all of our listeners around the world.
I just want to say how important, like really how important it is that we have the opportunity to just speak in unity.
Yeah.
You know, I'm here with 2 people in 2 different parts of the world that, you know, I'm uncontestedly Indigenous, and yet these 2 other people that other people would say, oh, you're not, they are Indigenous. They're Indigenous to this earth, and they're my cousins, and they're my blood relations. And so there's this story. It's an old story from a long time ago with the Anishinaabe about the first man. And when the first man was laying down to end his life, and his creator and his family were there, and they asked him, you know, is this satisfying for such a journey? And he sang a song, and I want to share that song with you. And in that song, there will also be some English verses that kind of explain a little bit about what's going on, but it's acceptance. And the clearest path to healing is acceptance. It's acceptance of who you are and every component of that made you who you are. If you're struggling, if you're challenged, if you can't understand why something doesn't feel right, study your parents and your grandparents and your ancestors, and you'll find a struggle that matches your own. And then you'll understand your journey. Right. So I'm going to share it with you, and I appreciate that you allow me to do this. It's called Going Home. And in some regard, we're all going home right now, right?
Right.
Yes. All right.
Absolutely.
Dabe debe we damoman. Demesi wu gekene kakwa. Akini ma we megun. Ningagigwe. Benasi wuge, benonda goziwa, ningagigwe, benasi wuge, benonda goziwa. The sound approaches, the thunderbird draws near, the entire world weeps, but I will go home. I will go home. The birds are heard singing. I will go home. I will go home. Dabe debe we damoan. Demesi wuge nekakwa. Akini ma we megun. Ningagigwe. Benasi wuge, benonda goziwa, ningagigwe, benasi wuge, benonda goziwa. The sound approaches, the thunderbird draws near, the entire world weeps, but I will go home. I will go home. Yiga wapa mean many wa'a. Thanks for letting me share that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
What an
you for
honor.
sharing. Yes.
Well, it has been a deep honor, and I have such gratitude for both of you now stepping into my life and allowing me into yours. We are all one. We are all one. We are all one. All my listeners all around the world, we are all one. And so I hope that you have found some inspiration in this episode. I will post links, important links suggested by my cousins, my guests, in the description of this episode. And stay tuned. We're going to be doing a very special weekly podcast through the month of November and maybe a little beyond, with special guests highlighting the Indigenous culture of North America and beyond, and the ripple effect that the history is continuing to have on the world in very positive ways. And I'm just sitting in gratitude. So thank you again, both of you.
Now we say miigwech. Can you all say miigwech?
Miigwech.
Miigwech.
That means thank you.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Bye, cousins.
Bye, cousins.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to Season 2 of the Lost Traveler Podcast with Henry Cameron Allen. Visit me online at www.henryallen.org. Thank you to my guests, and thank you for tuning in. Let's keep striving for a better world together.